Well, hello, Internet. Welcome back for another amazing installment of Talk to People Who Want to be USPSA President. And with me tonight is another USPSA presidential hopeful, Mr. Yee-min Lin. Yee-min, good evening, sir.
Dave, how's it going tonight?
Doing well, doing well. So I think a lot of people who are watching this or listening to this probably know who you are, but for the handful who might not, who are you? And I'll go ahead and roll that into the first question. Why are you interested in becoming the next president of USPSA?
Well, thanks for having me in on tonight and taking time out of your schedule. So my name is Yee-min. I'm originally from Kentucky. I then joined the Marine Corps. It seemed like a good idea at the time out of college. After the Marine Corps, they put me in California, and I stayed there. Just didn't feel like going back home to Kentucky at the time.
So all that college learning wasn't smart enough to keep you out of California, huh?
Well, like one of my Marines used to say when we were in Iraq, sir, I barely graduated from college. Yes. You went to Yale. Yes. And we're both in Iraq right now. Yes. Sir, I think you got screwed. And I couldn't really do anything other than laugh because we were both in the desert together. So afterwards, I spent a little bit of time working in the Silicon Valley tech industry as a program product manager, as a technical trainer. And that was around the time that I found USPSA in 2014. Yeah, 2014, 2015. So before then, I'd spent quite a bit of time in the tactical defensive community. So I trained with some of the better known names at the time, Frank Proctor, Pat Rogers, and someone in the industry mentioned USPSA. So I went and found a local club, and kind of took off from there. So had the opportunity to basically work a bunch of matches. That was really the easiest way for me to be able to go experience matches outside of my area without spending a ton of money. And in the process, met a lot of great people out there like yourself, and really got a chance to see what USPSA is, outside of my local geographic area. So as far as to answer, why I'm invested in becoming the next president of USPSA, a lot of that does feed off of the experience I've had working matches in, every area. I think Area 3 and Area 7 are the only two I haven't been to. And it's the idea of taking the best and, the best practice that we have, serving the membership, serving the community. It's kind of what's driven me from working matches as an RO, then as a CRO, and occasionally as a range master. And, I really enjoy the community. It's a great group of people that, really do surprise you in terms of where they come from and how they got into USPSA. So, we talk about all the different socioeconomic backgrounds that people come from. We've got guys that work in the tech industry, blue collar workers, even transgender. I know that's something we talked about before the program went live. You really do get a broad swath of people who come out to basically enjoy exercising their Second Amendment rights. And, that's something I'd like to be able to serve that broad-based community and lead them into, hopefully what will be a glorious future. Very good.
Very good. And this curveball, you don't know this one's coming, but one of my buddies says he's going to bed early. If I could ask him. So the question is, excuse me, for those listening, in the name of shooter experience, would you consider limits on make-ready times to help matches move?
So I know there is a video out there that I may have posted from Area 4 where you and John Bautista were talking about writing the next great American novel. One of the things I've always thought about is that time that competitor makes ready. It's really their time, without looking at the stage turnaround times. That's really the key right there, is seeing how long it takes from one person to make ready to the next person making ready. And so generally that's actually that should be built into the match planning where, if it takes roughly, 3 to 3.5 minutes, that generally gives you room if you have the squads balanced appropriately. So, would it be possible to have something like a pitch clock? If we're really looking at somebody that's, making ready even longer than I am, and you've finished the next great American novel.
That's not possible. You're the longest.
Oh God. If it really is something like that, that's certainly something we can look at if we're really trying to fit the maximum number of competitors possible within, a given match day. But, before making that kind of assessment, it would be really helpful to look at the master tablet. It shows you how long it takes for a squad to get through. And if we have that data and it really turns out that, there are competitors that are sort of delaying the match progress, by a significant amount, then, you have to have some quantitative data to actually be able to make that evaluation.
No, not a bad point. I personally think that it would improve the quality of life. It's just because Texas is a good example. We have the Texas winter. Like, we can shoot throughout our real winter because it's not that cold.
Right.
But when it's 105 degrees outside and the sun is as brutal as it is here, like, we actually have match turnout in the middle of summer drop. Like, it's really high in the spring and really high in the fall. I mean, we start the matches an hour early in the hot months, but even still, like, I mean, if you're out much past noon, you're cooking. So just every bit would help as far as maximizing match flow, because, I mean, there aren't even any majors between roughly June, July, not even June. I think May is Dragons Cup. I think it's the last Southern major until, I want to say Oklahoma might be in July. But other than that, I think that's it. So,
yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, to be perfectly fair, I know that when it's a club match, my mindset is certainly a lot different, having to go out there and vet stages, and you're just trying to get through the match. And then when it comes to a major match, competitors have a very different mindset. They really want to perform their best, and so at a club match, I think we obviously have a different mindset and going, hey, I'm just out here to hang out with my friends and shoot the brown targets. And then at major matches, we usually try to count for that and saying, hey, people that would normally take a relatively quick time to do make ready, they're really trying to perform their best. And so that's something I've always tried to keep in mind. If how would I want to be treated as a competitor if I was that competitor? And some guys just take a little bit of time to get into the zone.
Fair enough. All right, back to program here. So how much of a time commitment do you see the role of president taking, and what, if anything, would prevent you from providing that level of commitment?
I don't really have a whole lot of preconceptions about the role. I know that it's currently defined as a part-time role, and I think the reality is, based on the size of the front office staff and the obligations that the organization has, it will effectively be more of a full-time role than anything else. If anything, I'm a stay-at-home parent right now. I've certainly talked about, my oldest son's, medical condition and the obligations that requires. And, I'm fortunate enough that, my ex-wife and her parents are, we co-parent. We do a really good job trying to balance the obligations of our kids with our professional lives. And it's just like any other job that you have, you try to find that balance of being able to serve the job that you're elected or you're hired for, as well as your obligations to your family.
Fair enough. And being a president, getting anything done, I mean, in a leadership position, influence is ultimately the tool you're going to have. You can't just come out and have a bunch of good ideas unless you can get other people to share those good ideas. So do you consider yourself an influential person?
I don't necessarily think that I would consider myself influential on the level of, say a Stalin or a Hitler. But as far as that's a good, well, they did lead a lot of folks to follow them in a rather magnificent war. But that being said, I try to be influential one person at a time. We talk about in the Marine Corps, being leadership by example, being the example that you want others to be. And so I don't necessarily see myself as an influential person to the masses. What I do see myself as being influential one person at a time. And if you can, get them to, follow the example that you set, and that spreads, then, that's the best way to go about it. So certainly looking at some of the things that we've talked about before with where USPS can go and where it's currently at, it's about collaborative leadership. And so that's certainly what I intend to bring to the organization is, being able to work with, the board of directors and the permanent staff to set a vision and move forward as best we can within a constrained budget. We certainly don't have just money coming out of our ears here. So,
but we could.
So that's something to work on. I mean, nothing really happens overnight. So
sure,
it's going to be an incremental process.
Fair enough. And I mean, a lot about being a president, being a leader is kind of having a vision for what the organization should be doing and could be. Do you consider yourself a man of vision?
Only on Tuesdays.
Only on
So
Tuesdays?
yeah, and
You get
today
one
is
good day a
Thursdays.
week, that's it?
I have one good day a week. Certainly, when we talk about vision, it's that vision is really driven by the experience I've had working major matches and being able to talk to competitors from not only within the United States but also Uspsa competitors from around the world. So what I see USPSA is really a community more than anything else. You look at the clubs. The clubs are basically the lifeblood of the sport. That's really where the majority of the activity occurs. And my experience, I don't know if that necessarily marries with what you have, Dave, but we go out there and there's a little bit of shooting involved, and there's a fair amount standing around, resetting and pasting. But it's really the interaction in between your squad that really makes the match experience really worthwhile. So I have a really good friend of mine that I shoot with out at Richmond Rod and Gun Club, and he's been in the sport for 10 years. And one of the things he's always said is, we all joined to get better at shooting, but we stayed for the people. And if the people weren't fun, we wouldn't necessarily go out and hang out with them for 4 to 6 hours in, the blazing West Texas sun or cooking at Dragon's Cup. So that's really my focus is, bringing a sense of community between all the USPSA members, and then trying to find that balance between those of us that participate at a very amateur level when we can, and those that, participate in a little bit more professionally. So those are kind of the two things I'm really looking at right now.
Fair enough. Fair enough. As far as the leadership you would provide the organization, how will you decide what your priorities are, and how will you be coming up with kind of what the agenda for the organization should be?
I think the most important thing that we can start with in terms of initiative is the communication between the leadership and the members. So I know that's been a very frequent topic of discussion. Transparency seems to be the hot button word at this time. Transparency can certainly be met in a number of different ways. From my perspective, it's just having regular communication. So certainly, even as much as we've talked with members in the sport, there's still things that will come out occasionally, whether it's the meeting minutes or the once every 3 months we get a magazine from USPSA that has the President's Corner on there. That communication isn't necessarily as frequent as maybe it should be given the tools that we have today. So certainly the first thing I would think about is communication. Some kind of regular communication every 2 weeks seems to sound about a good place where you just sit down. I would sit down and communicate with the membership and say, hey, here's what we're looking at. Here's what's going on with nationals. Here's what we're looking at prior to the board meeting, so that when meeting minutes come out, it's not necessarily surprise, and you're at least given some notice so that members aren't necessarily looking at it and having to fill in the gaps with their own, ideas, incorrect or not. That would be kind of the first thing. The second part is, something that I think we'll answer in another one of the questions I think you've got coming up here. But, communication, I think at the end of the day is really what I'd like to be able to work on. So every 2 weeks, hey, USPSA, this is what's going on, and, take it from there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We've got Mr. Hopkins, former presidential candidate who would have been joining me in a chat, but he actually threw out an interesting question that I'll field as well. How does being a traveling range officer translate to being president of the organization?
Well, one of the things about being a traveling RO is that you get the opportunity to talk to every competitor that comes through a match, right? So if we take a look at Dragon's Cup was a really great opportunity to speak with members from every area. If I remember correctly, every area sent competitors to the organization. So that's one way to sort of keep your finger on the pulse of what members are dealing with at the local level, as well as concerns they have at the larger level. Working as the traveling RO, it's not necessarily just the little things that we see running a stage. It's also helping set up, talking with the match directors, seeing what sort of challenges they deal with in terms of match budget, match planning, match advertising, all these things that we've talked about before with what makes a match great. And those ideas you can basically carry with you to other areas and say, hey, we saw this really great idea, whether it's using coroplast to indicate hardcover hits, or if it's using a Coroplast USPSA target as a backer first swinger. Those sort of ideas are things that, as a leader of an organization, you can take that information, consolidate it, and then disseminate it to the membership so that they can use it at, if they decide to. So it's also another opportunity to, being a traveling CRO has also given me the opportunity to just be in touch. I know we're sort of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think that's part of what being a president is. It's being able to communicate with members in person, face to face, as well as gathering their ideas and spreading them to the rest of the organization.
Fair enough. So you've got a good understanding of the product and how it's working because you're going all over everywhere and seeing different things. And you think you would be able to, just to summarize, be able to exploit all of that experience and leverage a communication platform to help good ideas spread. Is that kind of what you're driving at?
That's fairly accurate.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, where do we leave off? There you go. So once you have your initiatives, how do you plan on creating support for your initiatives? I mean, you can have great ideas, but again, if nobody thinks they're good ideas, I mean, you'll be taking the pot shots from the podcasting set just as much as anybody else would. So how will you create support for your initiatives?
I think part of that is we talk about building consensus, but I think it's really more about the collaborative leadership. So, I served as president for Richmond Rod and Gun Club, my home range, for about 2 years. And it's a very similar position to what the USPSA president is right now. On paper, it does not appear to be that there's a significant amount of what's the right word? It doesn't appear to be that there's a significant amount of power, but there's definitely power by influence. So if you look at, United States presidents, there are some that have had a lot of executive power, and there's some that have been able to get a great many things done just by the sheer force of will and being, a personable guy and convincing. So if we were to think about, say, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they were on opposite sides of the floor. They were very energetic enemies during the day, but at the end of the day, they would go out and they'd have dinner, they'd sit to each other, and they'd hash out, what was actually workable. And that's certainly the approach that I intend to bring is, working, we can go at each other's throats, during the board meetings, and then afterwards, we figure out, hey, we're really trying to push the organization in the same direction. How can we best go about doing this?
Fair enough. Is your main goal to restore USPSA to what it was, or help USPSA become what it could be?
I really think it's a combination, but the priority would be taking USPSA into the future. So there's been a fair amount of discussion about about adapting to the marketplace and adapting to what the United States firearms industry is creating. And I think that's a certain part of what we need to do. I think I talked earlier about being able to find that balance between the casual competitor who maybe shoots a couple matches at their club during the year, and those of us that spend a fair amount of our time and money to travel and compete professionally. So trying to find that balance and making it so that USPSA can be a place for the casual competitor, while also being a place where the more professional types can actually make a real life goal of things. I mean, certainly that's a discussion that we've had before is, we're very interested in the sport. Okay, well, how do we turn our interest in the sport into something that is a little bit more monetized?
That's yeah. I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah.
Oh, we're trying to hit the cough button. Couldn't quite make it. Battling a bit of a cold, so I apologize to everyone listening. And along those same lines, do you view the position of president to serve at the will of the membership, or to provide leadership to help USPSA prosper, realizing that the general membership doesn't have access to all the facts and data?
I think it's a little bit of both. We have a board of directors that's elected. We have a president that's elected. And I'd like to think of it as really a representative democracy where the membership elects its representatives to represent their interests as well as to guide and lead the sport. in the best interest of the organization. So certainly there is a leadership aspect in there to help USPSA proper as you phrased there, but it's not something that we would necessarily do in a vacuum. Based on whatever magic sorcery that we have, there is definitely input from the members that would be welcome to help guide us in the decision making process. So let's just use 2011 slide ride optics. That is something that is certainly coming out as a viable technology. It's certainly something that has started to grow within the last 2 years or so. Where you position that, I think there's certainly a place for that. It's but that's something that we would certainly talk to the membership and say, hey, how much interest do you have in a new division? And then what are your options? Do we roll this into carry optics? Do we create a separate division? And that information is what we can use to be able to make, an educated decision on the future of the sport. And at the end of the day, it's also a communication process. So providing leadership is not very worthwhile if you're not communicating on a regular basis to the membership and let them know, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. You don't necessarily have to agree, but at least, we're giving you the information that we can.
No, very fair answer. But what is the single biggest issue that you see USPSA facing, and what do you plan to do about it if elected president?
Well, I certainly don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think the communication aspect is probably the biggest issue at this point. We've certainly seen some improvements with the meeting minutes being more detailed than before. They're certainly not one-liners, but there's still a pretty significant information gap between what the leadership provides through the meeting minutes and regular communication, and what the members perceive that information to actually say. So there's a fair amount of reading the subtext or reading in between the lines. And so certainly one of the things I really like to do with that is, we addressed earlier, having this sort of bi-weekly fireside chat, so to speak, something pretty much like we're talking about here, where I sit in front and it's about maybe 5 to 10 minutes of this is the state of USPSA and this is where we're going. That in my mind is, a step in the right direction towards improving a regular communication process between the organization and the members.
Well, that seems like a pretty easy goal, even with the handcuffs that the board has put on the new position. I think that's a very achievable goal that you could make happen there. And what is the biggest battle with the modern age you see USPSA needing to address?
So we've certainly had very detailed conversations about this before. Basically utilizing social media, utilizing the communications technology that we have. We both seen a certain amount of humor tossed at USPSA and how it currently handles its social media. That's something that I think we could certainly better utilize to, what we've talked about YouTube, right? And so certainly that's, if that's something that we have to more carefully navigate so that we can show the millions of gun owners that are out there in the United States that, hey, this is a thing, this is interesting. This is something that helps you with your Second Amendment rights. It helps you with your ability to handle firearms. And oh, by the way, it's a great community that you can hang out with, on a regular basis, people that are willing to literally give you the guns off their belt, to give you ammo from the primers that we all wish we had, just to ensure that you're able to continue with the match. So there's certainly some cultural things that I think we can leverage with social media to just bring some positive focus, some positive attention, and grow the sport in a measured kind of way.
So just kind of a follow-up question to that. Do you see the sport changing as a result of having more of an outward appearance, or do you think we just guard kind of what it is and change it as it kind of makes sense to the people playing it?
I mean, there will probably be some adjustment. The game is the game. I mean, if we sort of look at baseball or any other sport, change in any sport is not necessarily something that happens quickly. That would probably be a more gradual process based on information that we get and feedback that we get from members and being able to read where the market trends are going. At the end of the day, though, anybody who participates in a sport, the first thing we sort of tell them is you kind of have to learn the sport. You kind of have to see how the sport functions before you're really able to kind of say, hey, now that I've spent a certain amount of time in this sport, these are some of the things I think we could do better.
Fair enough. I mean, the game is always going to change. We didn't get it right. It's not perfect now. People cry about the rules now. I think it's always going to change to some extent, and I think that's going to be relatively a constant. So,
right.
Moving on, how do you plan on reducing turnover in USPSA members? For those listening who may not be aware, USPSA hemorrhages about 1/7 of its members year on year and has for the past several years. So just to stay exactly where we are, we have to add about 6,000 to 7,000 new members a year just to stay put.
So that's definitely a very interesting question. The first challenge to kind of reducing turnover is really asking those members why. USPSA and action pistol shooting in general is a disposable income sport. And certainly, and what we've definitely seen within the last 3 years is even if you're just trying to buy factory ammo, I mean, what are we looking at? 40 cents per round for 9mm. You're looking at going from $30 to $1,000 for primers, and now paying $100 is somewhat acceptable just to stay in the game. So there's definitely some outside factors that we don't necessarily have a whole lot of control over. People start in the sport, they realize how much it takes for them to actually stay involved in the sport, and life changes and they sort of move on. For something like that, that short of creating the USPSA primer factory or the ammo factory, there's only so much we can do there. Having an exit interview, any other organization, any sort of subscription you have, there's always some sort of exit interview that asks you, hey, why are you no longer renewing your membership, or why are you not staying in the sport anymore? I'd really like to be able to start with that first before we can make an informed decision on why the turnover is happening and what, if anything, that we can do to kind of address that issue.
That'd be a step in the right direction. I mean, we're not doing anything now to even understand what the problem is. And I guess the ability to solve any problem is going to start with understanding what it is. So that's better than what we're doing now. And somebody in the chat is saying they're going to take a drink every time we say fair enough. So fair enough.
The humble marksman drinking game.
Yeah, go for it. So that was a fair enough response. So, and how do you plan on finding new USPSA members to place those that turn over, or how do you potentially see growing the organization?
So finding members is really only one step in the process. Some of that is tied to the question about the challenges we have in the modern era. It's really using social media to kind of expose USPSA to the general population. I know I was fortunate enough to find USPSA through the tactical community because we had somebody who said, hey, this is the way to really get better. There's definitely far more people that I've talked to where they found out about USPSA through a friend at a static line that says, hey, you're actually pretty good at this. You want to try come shooting action pistol? Not to flip the question on you. I mean, we may have covered this before, but how did you find out about USPSA?
I found out through IDPA. There was a gun range near my house that had an indoor IDPA match, and kind of started attending that. Then somebody showed up and started beating the crap out of everybody. So why is he so good at shooting pistols? Like, oh, he shoots USPSA. What's that? I started listening to the podcast and all that kind of stuff. And when I felt like I kind of had gotten close to kind of topping out in IDPA, I went and showed up for my first USPSA match, and I was like a middle C guy, like immediately, when I was an expert in IDPA. And so I was like, oh man, there's a lot of growing I can do if I stay here. So long answer condensed down for the TLDR crowd is the gun range near my house had a TV screen that played match footage. So that was it.
Well, and that's certainly better than how it's normally passed around, which is literally word of mouth. I mean, I think we've sort of approached USPSA from a word of mouth perspective. I think we can sort of leverage that through social media so that it expands to a broader audience, and showing them that this is a fun sport and that it's a way to improve your Second Amendment skills and your firearms handling. So being able to leverage social media. And I think the second part to that question is really having a place for members to shoot at. So I know at least with our club, we max out at about 150 competitors. I mean, we're basically running a level 2 sectional for our club match every 2 weeks. So growing the membership is really just one part. If we can't convince people to actually create clubs, to run them, and to support them in their ability to run club matches, or to convince ranges that, hey, this is something that is in your best interests, growing the membership is kind of one leg. If nobody has a place to shoot, we could have 100,000 more members, and they're going to be crowding into the same matches that are currently existing.
And I thought I'm actually going to do a video on Dragon's Cup. It's not going to be a traditional match video, but I found it really interesting that Dragon's Cup had the attendance of an area match, despite being just a level 2, but it's in Odessa, Texas, which is 5 hours from the nearest city of approaching 1 million people. I mean, it's an itty bitty town, and the club that hosts the match gets between about 16 and 30 people attending it, and still they put on what, I don't know if it's the best level 2 match in the country, but it's the best one I've shot in a long time.
It was really good. And so some of the considerations to why Dragon's Cup was really good, one is certainly the staff. Billy and I talked about the stages, quite a bit before the first Dragon's Cup, as far as, what would work, what would be a good idea, what wouldn't. Even though there's only 16 or 30 people there, the community really came together to help support the match. So Charlie and Teak Allen, they did all the cooking, and to a certain extent, Marco Davis, right? Marco basically built.
He was the benefactor for the whole thing, basically.
He was, and so when you have that kind of backing. And the reputation that the match got from the first year, it was at the same time as Area 6, but, the community is very small. We all talk, everybody goes, hey, what did you think about this match? And the experience that everybody had at Dragon's Cup was so good from last year that, people were willing to say, hey, let me go travel out to West Texas and bake in the sun for, 11, 12 hours because the match had a good reputation. And so I think that's really one of the keys there. And at the same time, it's all, it's the one match they kind of focus on a year. So when you have a year to just focus on one match, that really helps, that you can pour all your resources into making that, the best experience possible.
Well, they did put an eye on the small details, like just the food that they were cooking. It wasn't like, let's go to Sam's Club and buy a bunch of Bubba burgers and slap them on the grill with the cheapest buns we can find. Like, it was restaurant quality burgers that they were cooking and serving to the bays. They had snack carts coming around. They passed out popsicles when it got really hot in the afternoon. I mean, they tried to take care of you. It's like, we know it's pretty miserable to sweat in this dust bowl of Texas, but we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that the experience is as positive as possible. Like, they really did put an eye towards the shooter's experience in a way that most matches don't. And I think that the fact that it's coupled with amazing stages and a deep competitive field just made it stand out amongst all the other matches. But we're sufficiently going down a rabbit hole at this point. But it's worth talking about because it's an interesting scenario that a range that small, that far away from everything else, is able to punch way over its weight in as far as attendance and quality and everything. And you wouldn't suspect that there's enough staff there to even run the thing, but ROs came from all over to RO the match. You were there. You're from friggin' California.
Yeah, well, I've known Billy for a couple of years, and I'd always told him I would help him out, whenever he needed it. And the stars aligned this time where I was able to come out. And Billy did a really great job, taking care of the staff. It was something that he was something it was a budget for. We basically stayed, in the nicest hotel that they could find. Everybody basically had their own room, so there was no doubling up. And he was able to do that all with, the match fee budget that he had. So that's certainly a discussion I wanted to have with him at some point to go, okay, how were you able to pull this off?
Yeah. It was a very well run match. So we kind of started talking about this, but I want to bring it back to it. But how do you see USPSA's rule set fitting into the IPSC rule set, acknowledging that the U.S. is the largest consumer handgun market in the world and gear trends largely have started developing here and not elsewhere?
So I think that sort of recognizes the fact that we have the Second Amendment as the foundation for firearms here, and that is a very unique position that you don't really find in the rest of the world. We've always had a little bit of a difference between IPSC, and IPSC recognizes that we're a little bit more forward thinking. We have a little bit more innovation. That being said, we were one of the founders of IPSC back in the day with Colonel Cooper, and being part of the IPSC community is kind of like being part of the United Nations. We might not necessarily like it. A lot of people may say, hey, why are we participating in IPSC when so few of us are able to go to the World Shoot or to shoot IPSC matches overseas? But it's still something that requires, United States leadership in there to say, hey, these are some of the things that we're seeing. We think that's something that can be adopted overseas, while also recognizing the uniqueness of the IPSC countries. So one of the considerations that's always been brought up is, well, why is production still such a dominant force in IPSC? And shooting the Caribbean Open, you really look at it and go, most IPSC competitors, they're basically shooting factory guns. They're shooting a Checkmate, or they're shooting a Tanfo or a CZ. It's not really that particularly easy for you to say, oh, hey, my gun broke. Let me go find, Bobby Machine Shop down the road. Hey, can you fix my gun? Because firearms are so much more heavily regulated overseas. And so that really explains why, to a certain extent, why production is so much stronger, because it's a gun that they can basically go buy through all the different legal hoops that they have to go through and then go shoot that. Whereas, carry optics, or even 2011 optics, it's a little bit more difficult for them just to say, hey, can I just go down to the machine shop down the street? Can you mill this slide for me? Because an upper is considered a serialized item in the rest of the world. So
it's an interesting position. It just feels like that there's this kind of like fetishization of IPSC amongst USPSA, certain USPSA competitors about, it's better than what we're doing. But at the same time, like, carry optics is, I won't say it kind of reinvented the sport, but it did to kind of an extent where it got a lot of people shooting, the stop and blast, run point to point technique basically completely went away. Like, it stopped being a viable approach to excelling at the sport. And it did, through its rule set, allow, a lot of discussions about target focusing and a lot of discussions about that. And I mean, we've seen the benefits and the fact that you can buy a $200 or $300 dot now, and it's not going to break. Like, it's led to, I don't know, the market is very different now than in 2018 when carry optics was kind of introduced. So
no,
I don't think we're done either.
It absolutely is. I mean, I think the market, USPSA has always been sort of the innovation to the firearms industry. I mean, if you look at dots on guns to begin with, that basically started in USPSA. You look at the old aim points that were, about this big sitting on top of an open gun. And, 20, 30 years later, that is the norm, not necessarily the exception. So I think there's a place for us to be able to innovate and to have a rule set that makes sense for the unique environment that we have here, while also working with IPSC to say, hey, these are the trends that we're seeing, and having basically saying, hey, this is something you should be considering down the road. So there's a place for us.
Yeah, but I can also respect the fact that we do need to kind of fit into them. But I do, moving on, given the gift of hindsight, was the flashlight rule and the appendix rule all that bad?
We've talked about this before. I mean, the reality is that it wasn't. I think the discontent about those particular rules were less about the pure substance of the rule and more about the manner in which the rule was implemented. It does open. I mean, we can both understand. I think we both agree that having the flashlight and the position insensitive gear requirements, that really opened up the sport to a crowd that really wanted to be able to shoot the guns that they carried on a regular basis. And that's not necessarily different from the tradition of USPSA dating back into the early 70s and 80s, when the only division you had was open, and it was literally a rung what you brung. So you were competing with everybody. So there is a historical basis for kind of a run what you brung kind of mentality. So at the end, we've both been to enough major matches where, yeah, there's still going to be those people who maybe run a little bit more of the gamer flashlights, but it certainly hasn't fundamentally changed the game to an extent that it's widespread acceptance. I mean, it is part of about experimentation. So every time a rule changes, just like Formula One, a rule changes, everybody tries to experiment within the bounds of that rule to see what works and what doesn't. And about midway through the race season, you sort of realize, hey, this is what actually works and this is what doesn't, and that becomes the norm.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I just want to, for the record, state that a lot of the people who had really hot takes about that rule and what it meant, like the way it was done was very, very poorly done, and it was basically crammed down everyone's throats. There's certainly a reason to be salty, but the lack of awareness for how that rule would be received by the general public was staggering. Like, it was really easy to look at and say, casual guys are going to get into this, and it is going to ultimately be a net win for the community. And it has been, because in Dallas specifically, we've got about a squad's worth of new shooters who just started shooting because they could shoot their carry stuff. And it's been working. I think it's been a positive change, but just highlighting that fact that not everybody who has a microphone has the insight to know how stuff's going to land. So buyer beware.
Yes, sir.
But what is the single biggest rule change that has bugged you the most? Because we've changed a lot of rules in USPSA, and everybody's got their pet rule change that they think was, well, that was done poorly. So what's that for you?
Well, I started off in production, so certainly the last production rule set change was a little frustrating. I can understand the rationale behind it. For those people who don't necessarily shoot production and have to enforce the rules, it can be very difficult to determine, hey, is this really a production gun? Is this really an OEM slide? Are those cuts factory? Are they not factory? Coming as someone who had to know the rules, it was a little frustrating, because those of us that shot production, we had to know that. We had to know exactly what worked and what didn't. But again, really, it's that rule set recognize the change in the firearms industry, where to a certain you don't really have a set gun anymore. Everything's very modular, right? So if you take a look at the SIG P320 series, I mean, the FCU is the primary component. The grips are exchangeable. You have the AXG, you have the TXG grips. You can throw everything from a 3.5-inch slide all the way up to a 5-inch slide that's optics ready, and so on and so forth. Given that USPSA doesn't necessarily have a robust technical inspection crew like F1 does, where they literally tear the car down apart just to make sure everything's set, I can see the rationale for making that a little bit easier for officials to be able to say, hey, this is good or this isn't. So again, I think it's very much like the appendix and the flashlight rule. It's not so much the content of the rule change that was frustrating. It was really more how it was implemented, and how there was very little communication beforehand that this rule change was coming down the line.
I don't disagree. And for those of you drinking along at home, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that it probably was making hammers deemed an external was it an internal modification when they made hammer that determination. I think that was the beginning of the end for a viable production division. But at the same time, like, let's pretend that never happened in 2016, 2017. And let's get to where we are now with the P320 and how mature that platform is, and how, like, you can do whatever the hell you want with that gun. And there's not really a way for them to stop you from doing it, because everything's interchangeable. And I was like, it would be impossible to keep up with at this point. So I don't know how you can do it. But
I don't think you really can. I mean, in a way, it's a good problem to have, because it highlights, the incredible amount of innovation that occurs within the United States firearms industry.
Okay, yeah, but it's a good thing ultimately. I mean, we might all be shooting guns that resemble like the Lago Arms Alien or something crazy at the end of the day. If we just force the sandboxes to be kind of as they are now and forever, it just kind of, I don't know. It's, you look at the guns, like, good example is CZ. CZ hasn't changed their trigger return spring design in I don't know, damn near 40 years. it feels like the market should put pressure on them to make that change to where it's like, okay, this is a little bit better now, and you don't break a trigger return spring every 10,000 rounds. Like that kind of pressure needs to be put on them to spur that kind of innovation and change. And I think it's personally a positive thing, but I'm super progressive as far as that's concerned. But what do you think, if any, rule change is the biggest change that we should have that hasn't happened yet?
So one of the things I was really thinking about was actually creating some kind of code of conduct for the members. We talk about how USPSA is a sport, and is a sport that should be a place for those of us that try to make it a career. I mean, if you look at any other professional sport, every other professional sport has some form of code of conduct. We right now the NBA playoffs are going on, and we all understand that sometimes refs will make a bad call, or they won't call it traveling or whatnot. And if you look at the players afterwards in their post-game conferences, they'll straight up say, if they're really fired up, hey, I'm going to get fined tomorrow, but I think the refereeing was really bad. And it goes to show that even those people that are paid, far more money than we do to participate in a kids game of sorts, they kind of have to be very aware of what they're saying, because words and how you present yourself have consequences. We certainly talked about, the USPSA has something in the rules, 1061, a DQ or procedural for disrepute. But, I don't know about you. I think I've heard of that rule being implemented once, because it's very difficult. Everybody has a different level of tolerance for, how a competitor behaves or how a staff member behaves, so on and so forth. So I think trying to codify a code of conduct and publishing that to the membership, with their input and with guidance from the board of directors, if we want to be a sport, then there's a certain behavior that is expected. We can be upset. We can be upset at the performance. We can be upset with how, a penalty or a procedural or hit is called. But there should be a point where, behavior beyond the pale is something that should not be really tolerated. And so
are you speaking purely at the match? Or are you speaking like in the online arena, or?
I mean, that code of conduct really should be applicable to wherever you talk about. I mean, if you look at professional sports players go on talk shows too, and they might, there's a certain level of pushing the envelope. I think that exists. I mean, you look at, let's use Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers goes on to a podcast and he's sort of joking about his vaccination status. That may be pushing the envelope, but you don't ever really get to the point where it's like, okay, that may have been a little bit much. And so, we have to be, we talk about being fair and professional. That's certainly something I've talked about with being fair and professional. And I think that would be, helpful to the sport. It helps with the volunteers. USP is still primarily volunteer activity. And most of the time, when a volunteer leaves, it's usually not, sometimes it's because real life happens. A lot of the times it's because, it no longer becomes fun, and, receiving abuse or receiving, a certain level of unprofessional behavior that's, unhealthy for the sport as well.
I can definitely see positives and negatives to it. I can think of some people whose behavior online, I mean, meme pages are fun, don't get me wrong. I enjoy meme pages, but I can also see people who've carried it kind of the step beyond just a meme page, to where I could see you could make a strong argument that it is tarnishing the USPSA brand by how these people behave. So I don't know. I don't love the big brother authoritarian sense of it, but I also certainly see the value in what you're saying, where, I mean, some people do need to be brought down a peg with how they behave in an online arena.
Well, I think that's always going to be the challenge. I mean, we're certainly not trying to look for something like an NFL commissioner. Hey, it's my way or the highway type thing. That's always going to be the challenge, to try to find that balance between being courteous and maybe enforcing an arbitrary standard that's that people might not agree with.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. I don't know. I'll have to consider it more, but I mean, I could see value in it, but also, I'm also my no FU response is also very strong.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. It's like I said, it's an idea. Ideas go from taking an idea to fruition is, that's part of the process.
And we had somebody throw out in the chat, since you've mentioned Formula One a couple times. So what teams or drivers are you a fan of?
So in full disclosure, I started following F1 because of Dave, because he was talking about what was it, the Drive to
Netflix
Survive
show,
series, right? And that Netflix series is a great example of being able to take social media, being able to take a media series and really generate interest in a country that didn't really follow F1 beforehand. So Red Bull is always entertaining to me. Max Verstappen, he's just really come into his own over the last couple of years. Who is it that used to? Oh, Daniel Ricciardo. Like, man, he's just such a great personality. Being from down under, he was with Red Bull and he was doing so well, and then he moved to Renault, and then things didn't work out for Renault. And who's he with? McLaren now? Yeah, and so he's with McLaren now, and so he's just one of those stories where you're just like, oh man, I really hope he can get back onto the podium and kind of regain some of that glory he had with Red Bull. But Red Bull and Verstappen, that everybody loves a winner to a certain extent. Fernando Alonso, man, he's just the old man that every time you think he's going to retire, he comes back and keeps racing. So Fernando, they're all really great personalities.
I agree. There's probably only a handful of folks on the grid who I don't really like. And not Mazepin, what's that dude's name? Latifi. There's too many Canadians. Latifi, Stroll.
Oh yeah,
we don't need
Latifi.
them.
Well, I mean, we all know Stroll really basically started racing because his dad had a bunch of money.
Well, yeah, but that's everybody. I mean, that's Leclerc, that's Verstappen, that's all of them. They all, very few of them did it. But
yeah, well,
probably losing a lot of our audience who are not here to hear us gab about Formula One.
Yeah,
but I have another question after this one. This was going to be my closer traditionally, but we got a little bit of time before we run up on the hour. But what makes you a bad candidate, and why shouldn't people vote for you?
So I would say that I'm a bad candidate if you don't like someone who likes to keep the sport fun, and you don't like someone who...
The non-answer is what we're going with. Okay.
Yeah, the non-answer. I mean,
I just work too hard. I'm too serious. I'm too humble. Just
if you don't particularly like stage walkthrough music, I know that's a little bit of a concern for some competitors. If you think that this is just a serious sport and that fun is not tolerated in any way, shape, or form, because we're all driving home with a million primers if we win the match, then that would probably be one reason why I'm a bad candidate. Why shouldn't people vote for me? If you just feel that the message that I'm bringing across is not the correct message, if you feel that you need to listen to social media influencers to do your thinking for you on voting for someone,
that. Listen to me. I will think for you. Do that.
Then those are perfectly viable reasons for why people shouldn't vote for me.
One thing that we talked about, I guess it was it area 4? Where were we? I don't remember where we were, but we started talking about it, and I thought it was a pretty cool idea. But we were talking about talking about Formula One, getting into a Constructors' Cup and involving the brands, and how it could be like so easy to just involve the manufacturers in what we do without changing the sport in any fundamental way other than just having a clear line of communication with the sponsors. What would your thought on be introducing something like a constructors championship for firearms maker? How would you like to see that?
I think that would be a great idea. I mean, it provides maybe a return on investment to the firearms manufacturers that support the sport in a way greater than just, hey, can we get some product for a prize table? Can we just get sponsorship dollars or things like that? We definitely talked about how do you drive membership engagement in matches that they're not necessarily attending. So there's definitely a very small crowd who will watch a live stream, who will, follow every match result on practice score. But for the general public, there's not really a winners or losers or some kind of solid score. I mean, hit factor scoring is not the most complicated, but I'm definitely not a math Asian, and there's definitely times where I go, I don't understand how that just worked. But to have like a constructors championship where you say, okay, in carry optics, you have Glock, SIG, CZ, Walther, so on and so forth. And the people that are shooting in for those particular guns, that's something that everybody loves a leaderboard, right? You see it and it's very simple. It's very easy to read. Hey, Glock got X number of points because their guys placed first, so on and so forth. That level of simplicity, trying to drive, sort of outside interest into a sport that we spend a lot of time watching. That's something I think is well worth, testing out to see what the reception would be like. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we would push at a level 2 match. I mean, we could certainly do, okay, the 8 area matches in nationals, those are the matches that are generally under the umbrella of USPSA in terms of what we can do and control. Put a pilot test out there, see how that works. Make that, publicize that. Hey, these are the guys shooting these guns. Who's going to come out on top? Who's going to have a gun that runs? Who's going to break down? I mean, we look at Formula One. I mean, half of the fun is, hey, will this car actually make it through the race? And you go, oh man, that guy wrecked, or his car blew up, or so on and so forth. It provides a level of interest and drama, manufactured or not, that would drive more interest in what we do.
Just hearing you talk about it, thinking about it, I just had the idea you could open up almost like a factory gun invitational or something like that, where you could have specific level 2 or major matches where the factories get to invite people purely to compete for, like, a cup type title, like what is it, in golf they do it with I can't remember which one. It's that match in the UK where it's the Ryder's Cup, where it's a battle against of the nations, not the individual golfers.
Right. Yeah, the team format, the Ryder's Cup team format.
Yeah, something like that could be fun and would give people something to talk about. And
that would actually be interesting. You could make it so that a particular manufacturer brings out whatever factory guns they're thinking of with, totally stock. Maybe a day or two to get used to the actual gun itself, how it shoots.
I mean, with a significant media apparatus, assuming we figured out how to make media, it could be pretty entertaining to where, like, with a match like that, you could have the factory gun guys compete. And then you could also do, like, if you wanted to do like an influencer shoot off or something like that, where if you wanted to go to some of these like esports guys who are into like CSGO and crap like that, get some of the big name streamers, get, some of these Twitch streamers, get, the Colian Noirs or just big name gun channel type guys, and put together kind of almost like an amateur sort of ranking with these people, and kind of tell the story of the sport through people who haven't kind of experienced it before. Yeah, but doing that in concert with the pros doing it for the manufacturers, I mean, that could be interesting on a couple different levels.
Yeah, and it's not just the guns. You're also talking about the ancillary gear, right? So it would be an opportunity to, try out, let's say Henning's got that new holster hanger, hey, you can actually try out the holster hanger without actually having to buy it. Or, you did the reviews for the DA Lynx belt, being able to try out the DA Lynx belt right there. So it really becomes a way to kind of showcase the innovation in the gear that's coming out, not just for guns, but also base pads, holsters, belts. I mean, you name it.
I mean, to me, that seems like it would be a win, because it would be content that would be interesting to the people who are members of USPSA. It'd find new eyeballs, potentially, assuming we get to realize network effects of, like, if you made it really easy for some influencers to get easy content off of that, like, that would show up on their channel and it would create a buzz. So if you've got a bunch of content dropping from a couple different platforms, it would grow the USPSA platform, and still, and it would create ROI for our sponsors who don't really get any ROI from us on this sport. Like, the ROI is completely intangible, assuming that, like, well, if we get the guys who are the most excited about shooting to be using our gear, then they're going to talk to people who, buy guns who aren't quite as excited, but can catch their passion for it. But you can't put a number on that. You can't say, okay, well, because, David's shooting a bull, then all of a sudden, there are 10 people shooting bulls now. Like there's not a way to measure that.
Yeah, but you could always do measurement of social media engagement. I mean, that would be something that you could look at. Okay, how many clicks are we getting? How many subs are you getting? That's at least a number that you could quantify. And then that would be up to the manufacturers to kind of go, okay, if I bought a bull because I saw Dave Blanton shoot it as the Ultimate Warrior and I totally wanted to try out this gun, then that would be that would be something that a manufacturer would probably have to track on their own.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun ideas, and I mean, you could probably still make money with that kind of thing. Like as a regular match, you could do it on the heels of a regular level 2 match where, the media people come out on Wednesday and the pros come out on Thursday, and then the regular match is Friday through Saturday. It would take more money because you wouldn't be able to get volunteers. So you'd have to pay setup and pay reset probably, because there's just not that many vacation days to do it. But I mean, you would have a legitimate business case to do it, because it's not like the match would need to be fully staffed. You would just need enough staff to walk with 2 squads, right, to make the match go. Which, well, I mean, would be much smaller.
You're basically looking at a match that's almost like a mini SHOT Show, or it's a industry specific trade show. So that would be something that wouldn't necessarily interfere with the competitors that want to shoot and not have to deal with the circus of a trade show. But then depending on the location, it's got legs.
Yeah, I mean,
it's definitely got legs.
There's a lot of fun stuff I think we could be doing with this that we're not. But I do think a challenge, regardless of who the next president's going to be, is getting a bunch of people who are, I mean, it's the same phenomenon with who's running the gun clubs, right? Like the people who have the most time are able to sit in the chairs, they get to wield authority. But, the chairs that they sit in are kind of far away from the current reality and kind of where the thing is sort of going. So, I mean, there's certainly some instances of some folks on the board who just, I mean, frankly, some of them might be clueless. And I would say that some of them are more engaged and switched on than others. But, I mean, I think when you get enough of those people together, the overly conservative sort of nature for what they're there to do prevents the ability to do like cool and innovative stuff that, I mean, if you were to gauge our social media right now, it would be like where our website was in like 2013, 14.
Right.
I mean, that's basically where we are. We're approximately 10 to 15 years behind the curve for how to use all this stuff. And the rules are going to change by the time we actually put a serious effort into trying to do anything. So,
I mean, I have some, there's certainly some empathy I have for the board. I mean, I'm still a board member at Richmond Rod Gun Club. And when you look at a part-time board, the challenge is always trying to be, is to not be reactive. And when it's not your full-time job, and when you have, life and other things that come in the way, it's really difficult to not be reactive and to deal with every fire that pops up in front of your face, to be able to have a proactive, stance. And so, I have empathy for the board in terms of what they're doing is they're trying to make that switch, at least from what I've observed, of being a completely reactive nature to something that's more proactive, and that just takes time. It takes time and effort, and considering they're all uncompensated and volunteers, you're really kind of doing this for the love of the game, which I think,
and it is a thankless job. I can't imagine the amount of time these folks are putting in to do all this stuff, but I mean, they get nothing out of it other than the game that they like gets to keep going on.
Right.
So, I mean, I realize in one side of my mouth, I'm criticizing these people, but I'm also thanking them on the other side, because I mean, somebody's got to do it. And it takes a person in a certain phase of their life to have the bandwidth and time to dedicate to doing it. And I mean, it's a tricky situation. So,
well, I mean, you can appreciate the effort that somebody's giving them while also being able to try to hold them accountable for the results of their actions. We can all try to do the best job we can. And if it just so happens the best job we can do is not really what we think the organization should be doing, You can call it criticism. You can call it being held accountable. They're at the end of the day, they are our elected representatives, and we have to be able to give them constructive feedback.
This is an interesting idea. I think I've talked about it before, but it's still a good idea. And fair enough. It would drive more interest if you set up a program like you can buy a brick of small pistol primers with every match shot. And I mean, striking deals to look out for USPSA members and actually provide value or give them access to something they wouldn't have access to otherwise. Seems like a solid idea to me.
That would be interesting. I mean, if we look at the ammo business right now, as much as we say we participate, I mean, I think the most I ever shot in one year was 30,000. And even then, that was on the high end. You figure your typical member who's only shooting at 6 to 12 matches a year. What is that? Maybe 1,200 rounds.
Yeah, I mean,
so
2,000 rounds or less.
Right. And so even if you take all 35,000 members and you say, hey, let's notionally say we all had infinite time and we were going to shoot 30,000 rounds a year. I think the number was something like 30 million or something like that, 30 million primers. And 30 million primers, even in the ammo industry, is kind of a drop in the bucket. So there's always that question of, okay, well, do we really have the economies of scale to be able to go back to an ammo manufacturer or a primer manufacturer and say, hey, we should get some sort of consideration for what we bring to the sport?
That math is over 1 billion primers, 35,000 squared.
I did say I was a mathematician. I was kind of doing that off the top of my head, but yeah.
I was like, hey, that doesn't seem like that many. So no, that zero didn't get carried over enough places, but yeah.
No,
but even at the two, I mean, if it is 2,000 rounds a year with 35,000, members, like getting people a supply of being able to purchase 2,000 primers or 2,000 rounds of loaded ammunition, that could keep people in the game and would be something that I think, is probably worth figuring out to give people access. Because, I mean, we're ultimately dependent upon that. And it's a straight pass through. The org doesn't need to necessarily make money on it. It's just a way to support our sponsors and support our members at the same time.
Yeah, I think we had some sort of program where Federal was selling ammunition. And if I remember correctly, again, everything's a good idea, and then you start having to look at taxes. If I remember correctly, I think that was the issue, was that there was a tax implication involved. So everything's a great idea, and then Uncle Sam gets involved, and we have to worry about taxes. But again, that's always a good problem to solve.
Fair enough. Well, Yee, I really appreciate you coming on. It's getting late here, and I know that you've had a long day as well. But I appreciate you coming on. If people want to find out more about you and what ideas you have or want to vote for you, what can they do?
So they can always go to the USPSA website. There's a section for the special elections. If you're not a member, you can go to www.keepuspsafund.com. That's kind of the website I'm functioning off of. You can always find me on Instagram under my name. I think I'm the only Yee-min Lin out there. You can also find me on Facebook. And again, if you have any ideas or questions, feel free to send them my way. I might not necessarily give you an answer that you want, but I'll give you the context of that answer.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Yee, I appreciate it. And not once during this campaign, if you used Yeeyee, like,
no, I'm pretty sure that's just you and someone else we know on the East Coast that says that.
Well, there's lots of rednecks out there who say Yeeyee. It's fine. It's fine.
Growing up in Kentucky, I can say I never heard that before.
Well, it's a new thing, and you're old, so I can understand why.
This
you
is
don't
true.
get
I'm
it.
only one step removed from being a boomer. 5
right.
years from now, I'm going to be that boomer saying, "Why do we have laser guns?"
That's true. It's very true. All right. Well, signing off, guys. Appreciate everybody who came out and participated in the chat. And fair enough.
Take a drink.
There we go. All right, guys. I'll catch you on the next one.
Hey, good night.